Greetings folks, this is the business end of the MSI GT76 Titan, and this review unit was sent to me from HIDevolution. That means our 200 watt 2080 has liquid metal. That means our 9900K has been delidded with liquid metal, Fuji polythermal pads. This will be the best version of this laptop probably in existence today. So what does that mean? Let's have a look inside and find out. Currently through HIDevolution, we have 6 SKUs available, ranging anywhere from the 9700K to the 9900K, the RTX 2070, and the RTX 2080. We have Full HD 144Hz, Full HD 240Hz, and Ultra HD 4K displays. HIDevolution has delidded the soldered 9900K, used thermal grizzly conducto knot, and they have shown to decrease temperatures between 10 and 14 degrees Celsius. We also have a 200 watt RTX 2080, that's right. Both of these parts, the CPU and GPU, have liquid metal on them both, as well as Fuji polythermal pads for the absolute best thermal management possible on the GT76. For memory, we have 4 slots total. 2 of those are occupied on the other side of the board. And underneath this metal plate, we have 3 M.2 PCIe slots, featuring 1 terabyte RAID 0 Samsung drives at around 2900s, both read and write. Very nice as a content creator. And underneath the bottom left metal plate here, we do have a terabyte of platter storage here. Feel free to replace this with an SSD should you wish. The network interface card is the AX200 Wi-Fi 6. Very impressive here, as this had faster download speeds when downloading the exact same file compared to the 9260 and the 9560, both side by side. Very impressive. Now, the 90 watt-hour battery on what is essentially a desktop replacement laptop was only good for about 1.5 to 2 hours on the Optimus-only GT76. However, if you were to limit the wattage of the first and second power limits and a few other tweaks that I will have detailed in the description below, I was able to consistently get 3 hours from the GT76. Our sample here weighs in at 9.2 pounds. It has an aluminum lid, an aluminum deck, and a highly ventilated plastic bottom panel. And on that bottom panel is a small pinhole in order to reset your CMOS should you push overclocks too far and it refuses to boot. Take it all in here, folks. This beast requires 2 230 watt power supplies that will connect into the proprietary dongle, and from there plugging into the GT76 for power. The way this is connected, both are required in order for this machine to operate plugged in. Now, when it came to the overall size, however, comparing this to a traditional thicker bezel 17.3 inch laptop, yes, it has a little bit more depth, but it's definitely not as wide. It's only a little bit thicker, and due to the hinge-forward design, when sitting in front of it, it actually felt smaller compared to a traditional 17.3-inch laptop, and using it on your lap as a laptop was not as bad of an experience as I thought it would be, despite it being 9.2 pounds. The I/O over on the left-hand side features the proprietary power plug, our LAN port, an actual Thunderbolt 3, 2 USB 3.1s, and a separate headphone and mic jack. On the right-hand side, we have a micro SD card connected via USB 2.0, not the fastest read-writes, but it is there, 2 USB 3.1s, a USB Type-C, a mini display port, and an HDMI. And the business end of our Lamborghini is one heck of a cooling solution. Opening our GT76 with one hand is super easy, and it comes to life quite quickly. The Windows Precision touchpad is smooth as glass. We have dedicated buttons with a very nice clicky actuation sound and feel to them. Our SteelSeries keyboard is quite a pleasure to use, as they usually are in my opinion. This Titan, however, does not feature mechanical keys. Under maximum load with the automatic fan curve, we'll run the temperatures as high as possible, and then they will begin to throttle, hitting 40 degrees Celsius on the keyboard deck. However, under full load, under the maximum fan curve at 58 decibels, we get a 10 degrees Celsius drop on the keyboard, and this is awesome. To maximize cooling, we have a dedicated hardware button which will put our fans at 58 decibels. In the middle we have our power button. And to the right of that, we'll open up our Dragon Center. So the GT75 Titan that I reviewed earlier this year was my first go with RTX. And the most common negative comment in that video was the thick bezels. People were getting really comfortable with the thin bezels, so MSI brought that deliciousness here with the GT76. Quite frankly, it's a flattering work of art with just the aluminum build quality, very sturdy hinge, lid, everything about this looks good. The panel is CMN175C. This is a Chi-Mei display. It's a Full HD 144 Hz, 100% sRGB at 400 nits. This is a fantastic display. When I go back to my daily driver laptops, I'm constantly trying to increase the brightness of what is 300 nits at its max. I got used to this very quickly. However, what I couldn't get used to was the webcam and mic. Have a look and listen. Our 720p webcam and microphone look and sound just like this. Keyboard strokes on our non-mechanical keyboard. Now, on a lot of these MSI gaming laptops lately, I've noticed that they would cancel out some of the ambient noise, usually giving you an example with maximum fan speed. But in this case, I'm not too sure if there's something going on with the software, perhaps a Windows update, but as you can clearly hear the fans in the background as well as my voice, so it's not quite working how I think it should, but perhaps an update can go ahead and solve that. Per usual, the Steel Series software will control our per-key RGB as well as the LED strip in the front and on the sides. The front LED strip offers a great deal of customization as each little slot there will enable you the ability to make it any color you wish. Feel free to have at it with this. This is a very robust and detailed RGB software solution. The red pulsating LED strip at the back of the chassis is not customizable, but you can shut it off by disabling the light bar. So I've been scouring the internet for proper reviews of our GT76 Titan, and it seems within the stock format that 200 watt 2080 is hitting thermal throttling even with max fans, and then 9900K at 5 gigahertz gaming is likely a pipe dream, but thanks to HIDevolution and their liquid metal application, this dream is now a reality with this laptop. With some more details on that, the 2080 pulls 200 watts. And when you're gaming, occasionally you will see it power limit throttle and sometimes you won't. It's right at the cusp as a desktop 2080 is 215 watts. We are right there. Now these are BGA soldered in GPUs, which means this is not replaceable, but the desktop CPU is. So to segue into that, now power limit 1 of our 9900K is 170 watts and power limit 2 is 230 watts. Now, even at 5 gigahertz for that short-term power boost, I never did see it hit more than 203 watts. Now, here's the thing. No matter what I do, running this laptop for an extended period of time will push the wattage down to 150 watts and it will settle there, which means in my handbrake testing, the best I was able to get was 4.7 gigahertz. As that pushed us up to that 150 watt mark, it'll hold that there all day. So putting it to 4.8 meant pushing it up to around 170 watts. That's a huge jump for just an extra 100 megahertz. This happens all the time when you work with overclockable parts. And let me just show you what that looks like. Have a look. The best our 9900K could do in this particular machine was 4.7, as we tend to be limited to 150 watts. Now bumping this up to even 100 megahertz more at 4.8 pushed our wattage way past 150, and it just did not want to settle at a stable 4.8. This is one of these things that when you are overclocking your CPUs, getting end chips from, let's say, places like Silicon Lottery can go a long way getting that extra couple hundred of megahertz. This is just the nature of the beast when it comes to overclocking. However, with this same chip disabled hyperthreading, ultimately simulating an 8-core 9700K, we can now run this at 5 GHz and just barely stay at that 150 watt mark or less, especially in gaming. Sort of makes a pretty unique case for that CPU, don't you think? Now for you Cinebench 20 benchmarking fans out there, stock, we are getting over 4,600 points. If we overclock this to 5 GHz, we can now score over 5,000 points, which is quite impressive. And if we disable hyperthreading and run 5 GHz on our 9700K, we're at 3,800 points. Stock Firestrike score gets our GPU at around 26,000 and CPU at 23,000. Overclocking to 5 GHz on the CPU and overclocking the GPU to 125 MHz does give us a tiny bump. And of course, simulating the 9700K with an overclock to the GPU, well, you have that as well. For those that are a fan of that particular CPU in this chassis, have at it. And the ray tracing benchmark Port Royale sits us at around 6,500 points. Apex Legends running the maximum fan curve of 58 decibels, all high settings will easily average 120 FPS. Maximum fans at 58 decibels, once again, Battlefield 5 here. Wonderful FPS, pretty solid thermals considering what kind of game we're working with here, and the CPU is pulling in the mid-80s for wattage at 4.7 GHz. This is pretty good stock performance here. Average FPS across all of the maps was around 125 to 130 FPS. Very playable experience if you ask me, just make sure you have your headphones. Even esports titles such as Overwatch have no problem maxing out the 144 Hz refresh rate. Now, of course, this is with everything on Ultra. Most esports players are not going to play at these settings, but nonetheless is a pretty powerful machine. When you get into the really high refresh rate stuff here, it's very difficult to saturate the GPU, especially on laptops, sort of nature of the beast, but I don't think too many people are going to complain with an average FPS exceeding 200. Witcher 3, Ultra settings, Hairworks, the whole shebang here. We're definitely getting some pretty high GPU temperatures as this is a very GPU intensive title. Overall, the performance here is great and it was almost exactly double that of the RTX 2060 that I had tested back in February. Of course, that is to be expected here. We do have a 200 watt RTX 2080 inside of a laptop. But with Far Cry 5, not everything is peaches and cream. You see, whether it is the title unable to utilize what the CPU-GPU combination can achieve at full HD, or the fact that we just need a higher resolution to fully saturate the GPU, it could be one of those two things, or of course, ultimately both. But as you can see here, we do have pretty low GPU utilization. However, if you want to bump this up a little bit, we do have some wiggle room here. Let me show you. Using Far Cry 5 here, we have 4 different scenarios. The top left is the stock GT76. The top right is the 9900K overclocked to 5 GHz. The bottom left is the 9700K simulated at 5 GHz, and the bottom right is the 9900K at 4 GHz. Both the top left and the bottom right, 4.7 to 4 GHz, the FPS performance was within 1%. Now, when you went to increase the 9900K to 5 GHz, it did yield an 8% gain in this title. Across all of the games that I have played and tested on this laptop over the last month, as you can see right here, this was about a average to maybe best case scenario, about an 8% gain from the overclock. Generally speaking, I did find that 4 GHz and above on this CPU for gaming was enough to saturate the GPU in what I would like to consider a average best case scenario, and what you would typically get for performance between 4 GHz and 5 GHz really wasn't too much, and if you were not monitoring any of this, I don't think anyone would know the difference. Where that CPU, of course, does take off is rendering, handbrake, and things like that. But as far as gaming goes, 5 GHz is kind of fun to look at, but in my opinion, it's not needed, at least not with the game titles that we have at this point in time. So with that being said, 5 GHz in games is definitely achievable across most titles, but as you can see here with Rage 2, we are still pulling at 100 watts many times. Our GPU is overclocked an additional 125 to 150 megahertz as well as the memory. Temperatures here are within check as this is not a very CPU demanding title. However, let me show you something that is. Alright, pulling out all the stops, maximum fan, overclock the GPU, overclock the CPU, everything is dialed in to the best of this laptop's capability. We have the de-lidded CPU, thermal grizzly conductor knot on, everything, Fuji poly thermal pads. This is as good as it's going to get. And what do you get for Battlefield 5? An average of 135 watts and temperatures into the 80s and 90s. Look out, folks, 5 GHz might not be for every title. If you feel comfortable running it here in this game, have at it. But for the 5 GHz fans out there, why don't we disable hyperthreading and simulate the 9700K? We're going to get around 30 watts less pulled in this title, averaging around 100. Check out the temps, the performance is great. I have no complaints here. As a matter of fact, this would be a SKU I would be looking at if I were to purchase one of these myself. That's how much I love what I'm seeing here. with HIDevolution's liquid metal gave us some really good temperatures after a 3-hour gaming binge. Nothing I complain about here considering we have a 200-watt GPU and the CPU was pulling near 100 watts. But see, how I play games is I turn off all the anti-aliasing, I turn off the ambient occlusion, I dial my settings in, I do like high textures, but the way that I've got my games running is I can get 144 FPS on most of my titles with the exception of a few such as Battlefield. Although I can average near 135 FPS with some tweak settings, here we have Apex Legends, maximum fan, my headphones are on, I'm getting 144 FPS basically all of the time, and temperatures are insanely good as the GPU is virtually doing nothing at this point. As a matter of fact, at 55 degrees Celsius out of the GPU, I have seen a lot of gaming laptops idle that warm. Like I said, tweak settings, here we are in Battlefield 5, I am averaging around 135 FPS. Now this is not an easy game to do this on, but this was about as good as I could get, and for the most part, this was pretty much stock CPU. I did overclock the GPU a little bit, and as you can clearly see, saturation of the GPU is not quite there, and that's just sort of the nature of the beast of some titles that we had demonstrated previously with Far Cry 5. Yes, I could overclock the CPU to 5 GHz, I wasn't a fan of the heat. But think about that with a 9700K, you can get a little bit higher FPS average, still not quite 144, but nonetheless, this is performance and I have no reason to complain about.
Everything that you have seen so far has been using Cooler Boost maximum fans. Not a fan of the loud fans? There is some acoustic tunability here, let me share with you. Check this out. So our GT76 has a beefy cooling solution and high wattage parts, but it does run up to 58 decibels, and I highly recommend you use that when running this thing at full bore. But for those out there that would prefer a much quieter laptop, well, you can actually do this here with some tweaks. Let me show you. So starting with the MSI voltage curve editor, I have our 2080 locked in at around 1500 megahertz at 0.7 volts. I will have a link in the description below that shows you how to use the MSI voltage curve editor. It does not cover this GPU, but the principle and application is the same. We've taken our 9900K, that is a 16-thread chip, and I have done nothing more to it than just limit its frequency to 4 gigahertz. I have not done any undervolting, and I have not modified the wattage. We're just going to let this do its own thing. Now, using the Dragon Center 2 software, limit your CPU and GPU fans to around 40%. That'll give us the sweet spot here to keep everything from thermal throttling, but instead of 58 decibels, we are now running between 36 and 39 decibels at load. You can hear my fingers clicking the mouse. You can hear my thumb hitting the keyboard. And yes, I'm sure if you listen, you can hear the fans, but this is a very nice setup. And I'm very confident that a lot of you out there are going to find what's going to work best for you. Maybe you want it a little bit quieter, maybe you want it a little bit cooler. There's a lot of tunability here with this laptop because it is so powerful. Dialing back some of the performance and wattage and voltage from these parts allows a lot of tunability within the fans in order to get what you perceive is the best fan acoustics from your laptop. And now we can play the in-game audio, no headphones on, and have a great time. Frame rate performance here, we typically average about 100 to 110 FPS on all the maps. And just for reference here, you can see that we are running everything on Ultra. Not bad. Not bad at all. Next, let's check out the actual sound audio from this, comparing it to the Aero 15, have a look at the BIOS, and wrap this puppy up.
Inside, our unlocked BIOS allows us to overclock our CPU, save our profiles, and potentially make some nice memory tweaks.
Hey, Bob. Jesus. What's up? Why don't you show them some ray tracing? Nobody wants to see that. On a laptop that's between $3,000 and $4,500? All right, you have a point. They're going to want to see it. Let's go on with it.
And now on to those interested in ray tracing. If the 2080 can't do it in a laptop, then perhaps this solution is not for you.
This is a great laptop, and I think the performance should speak for itself, and I believe that was shown pretty well within this review. But there's two things I have to add here. One, the biggest con being no G-Sync. Now, a fully dedicated solution would mean no integrated graphics, and we would be foregoing a few things if that were the case. And I know a lot of people out there like using QuickSync, and I know a lot of people out there like NVIDIA Optimus just to get a little bit more battery life out of their machine, or in this case, desktop replacement. I get it. If we would have had the Muck switch to have it have a switchable type graphic so I could have my cake and eat it too, have a little bit better on battery time, still have access to QuickSync, but then have a G-Sync display and have that gaming bliss present on a machine like this, to me is a no-brainer. Now, I've been on the forums and I've run this channel now for a few years, and I think it's around maybe a 60-40 split where people buying a machine like this would prefer G-Sync, but surprisingly, believe it or not, there's others out there that claim that they can't see the difference and they would rather have Optimus and of course have that QuickSync and everything that's tied to it. But just being able to have that switchable graphics on here is a real head scratcher from MSI. But if you can live without it, then of course I'm good with that. Secondly, and the most important aspect, period, if you really want one of these, you likely have seen other reviews of this laptop. You've seen the GPU throttle, you've seen the CPU throttle, and you've also seen no way in heck was it getting 5 gigahertz. But we are getting 5 gigahertz gaming, and we are getting a GPU that's pulling 200 watts and not thermal throttling. In fact, in many cases, a reasonable distance away from it, sometimes between 10 and 15 degrees. I think that's really good and something really special considering the overall form factor and the actual parts that are inside. And I bring this to your attention because buying one of these laptops and spending this much money and not going through a company like HIDevolution and having liquid metal put on here, it just, in my opinion, it seems like a waste of money. Don't you think? To buy one of these laptops stock and just have it thermal throttle, what's the point, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Links in the description below for all things talked about today, as well as a lot of details in there, especially for those that are genuinely interested in this laptop. I'd like to thank you for watching, and this is Bob of All Trades. Peace out.